we're back with a new leather jewelry workout. So for this one, we're gonna actually take some blank cuffs and build layer by layer by layer until we end up with this druzy topped, over the top mixed media cuff bracelet. I love these things. I'm so excited to show you how to paint and bead these leather cuffs. So the first thing we're gonna do is just kind of look at how we can alter these cuffs. I've gone ahead and splashed some paint on this one. You can use a nail file just to kind of distress them a little bit too. Let's keep working on this black one actually. I really love distressed things, and I find that these nail files have just enough grit to get that look that I want. And you can also run over the whole thing. That also kind of removes any sort of treatment to the cuff so that your paints and adhesives take better too. So once you've got that done, then we're gonna just keep building layers. So I used a stiff bristle brush, and I'm using these mixed media paints, really basic. You can get them at the craft store. And I just splashed over it with some paint. Now I'm gonna use those same paints with these fine pattern stencils. I think you can tell which one's my favorite on this sheet. And we're gonna dip the end of our brush into the paint, and you just wanna be careful that you have just enough paint to stencil your design on. Too much paint on the end of your brush and you're gonna have that paint seeping under and into places that you don't want, and you're gonna lose your pattern. So I really love these metallics. I never really know where these cuffs are going when I start doing them, but I love the childlike nature of them and just sort of experimenting. If I don't get good results, you can always paint over it, and that's the beauty of it. We're not going for perfection here. So once you're happy with your design, I'm even gonna stencil over the snap area just to get a little bit of that gold down there. We're gonna move on and add some dots and stamping. So I love using the end of my paintbrush. You wanna blot that off a little bit to create dots like that. And you can do it all over. It doesn't matter if it doesn't make a perfect dot. Remember, this is just the background for your beadwork, right? And then I think I need to pull in some lighter pink. So I'm gonna use the same paintbrush and do that a little bit. Just a little bit. Just a little dab. But that opaque pink color kind of adds a different tone with the gold paint. And you can see I'm using the same brush. I'm okay with those paints blend a little bit. If you want a more solid coverage, you would want to use a brush like this, which is a little bit softer. So now, one of my very favorite things is to rubber stamp. I'm using a permanent ink pad, and this is like my most favorite stamp. It looks like newspaper kind of collaged on there, and you're just gonna go over these. You want to shoot for these areas, obviously this might be a duh, but you want to shoot for the areas with the silver underneath so that your text shows up really good. And if you miss a little bit like I did there, you can go back over, no big deal. And once you're happy with the effects, then you can just keep building up those layers. You could leave it there, or another one of my favorite things are these markers. And these are just regular paint markers, but you can add some scribbles if you want. You can add some zigzags. This is where you can really doodle. Zentangle's really big, you could Zentangle all over them. You can add some silver, and if you hate it, if you're like, oh, those are just too harsh, just go over it with a paper towel, smear them out a little bit, and distress them and tone them down a little bit. You can also make a pool of this stuff, and smear it out. And then rubber stamp on top of that. Really, like, the possibilities are endless. And if you're nervous about diving right into your leather cuff, don't worry, you can just practice on your scrap surface here. So once I'm done, I always go back over and I distress those edges again just to make this surface not look so new. I hope that makes sense. But I just don't want anything to look too crisp. Okay, so now once you're happy with it, the last thing you want to do is seal it. and protect all of that hard work that you just did. So I almost shook my sealer. You don't want to shake sealers because you're going to get bubbles, and that's going to show up on your cuff. So this is where we want to switch to a softer brush, because you just want to get a nice coat. And you're going to see how this stuff really, really, really makes your colors pop. And I just like, this is probably my favorite part. It's kind of like, ah. And once you're finished, let's take a look at these other ones that I've been doodling on. Here's one I did. This was on brown. This is another black cuff. And if you hate the snap color, why not just throw a little bit of paint on it? You know, you can always tone that down a little bit and just blend it all together. So this is the basic idea. Oh, we don't want to put our wet one in that stack. And now let's embellish it a little bit with some beadwork. So these druzys, everybody always asks me, how do I get the druzys or anything to stay on top of the leather cuff? And I do a few things. The first thing I do is kind of plan out my beadwork. So I'm gonna pull in a blank cuff here. Druzys are really hot. They come in all different flat back styles. I really love the gold ones. So I've gone ahead and started stringing up sort of a pattern. And what we're shooting for is to create sort of this beaded loop piece that's gonna sit on top. It really depends. I've gone ahead and glued this one down, but you can leave it free form for now and glue it later, or you can glue it now. It depends kind of on your hole punch. So learn from me and test it first to see if you can get close enough to your druzy. This will make more sense in a minute. So I've gone ahead and just sort of doodled up some bead design here. And now I'm gonna run it back through. Let me get this out of the way. I'm gonna run it back through the druzy piece and the crimp that's next to it. And these crimps don't really serve a purpose other than they are going to hold each loop sort of in place. And what's gonna happen is you're gonna run that on through your druzy. You might need a bead reamer here. Sometimes rocks are drilled a little bit odd, and I'm using extra thick beading wire. But you're gonna run that on through, and then you'll have a piece that looks like this. Let me turn it around so it makes sense. So we've just run it through the crimp here, there's another crimp here, and I'm zipping up the tails here. The next thing you're going to do is crimp those in place. And like I said, these aren't really serving a purpose other than to sort of just hold those loops secure. I feel like it gives the piece like a little less stress the more spots that you have it crimped. So now I've crossed the tails through that middle one. I'm gonna pull it snug, and I'm just using my chain nose pliers to give it one last flat crimp. I know these are kind of ugly, but don't worry. We're gonna cover them with leather. So trim your tails, and then you're gonna use an ink pen or a marker or eyeball it like I did, and you're gonna punch some holes next to it. If you look at the finished one, I've just used leather to stitch over these pieces. Now for this part, we're gonna use 1/2 millimeter diameter leather. This stuff is not strong. That is why it's a little bit fragile. That's why you wanna use a multi-purpose epoxy to glue your druzy down. But you can just stitch these pieces on. And if you have a large hole punch, you can double up your leather. This is fun. You're just gonna experiment a little bit. It's okay to free form. You can see if you like it, if you wanna do more, but I do a lot of this. I tie it so that I can see the connections. I really love how that looks. It kind of adds that rustic nature to the piece, that distressed look. And I just love how the sparkle and the leather all mix together. And I'm just gonna go with that. And then if you're a little bit nervous, a good trick is to grab your adhesive. Now don't use super glue here because we've got some glass beads, and if you use a super glue, that's gonna frost your beads, and that is a downer because once they're frosted, you can't get it off. But just use a head pin and tuck a little glue under your knot, you know? You could even, before you cinch up the knot, you could do that little bit of glue in there just to make it extra secure, which I like to because this thing's gonna flex and bend, and so I think it's always good, a little bit of added security. you know, lots of crimp beads, lots of multi-purpose adhesive. Makes for happy jewelry. All right, so let's look at the finished one. You can see on this one, I've just doubled up these knot pieces. This one I kind of did a half hitch through and knotted. All of these instructions will be on the website, but this is a workout. This is like one of my favorite workouts, and I'm really glad I got to share it with you today.